We are recording this proceeding and we are live on the YouTube. We can start.
Okay. Thank you. Well, welcome everybody to the Planning Coordination Advisory Committee. Today is May 22nd, 2024. We have Supervisor Walkinshaw, we have Supervisor Franklin, and I are here. So we will wait until we have a quorum in order to approve the minutes. But we can go ahead and start the discussion, and we can't do our action items there for the minutes. So we'll go ahead and start the discussion. And the first thing on the agenda is the 6-year program update.
Thank you, Mayor Colbert. Sri Nandudri, Senior Manager at NVTA. In the past couple of meetings, we presented you the methodology we use for evaluating the projects for funding decisions. And last meeting, we presented how those scoring came out and all the evaluations results, and in detail we went through each of those quantitative and qualitative measures. At the PPC meeting, the Planning and Programming Committee meeting, which is a subset of the authority itself, we were requested to give a little bit more details about one of the measures that we were looking at. That's what we wanted to present to you and get your feedback on that next step. So I see we presented this in the last two meetings, the whole 4 primary components: eligibility, quantitative analysis, qualitative considerations, and public comments. One of them, the alignment with core values, that's part of the qualitative measures we looked at. So that is what we were requested to give more details of how we did it. And it's primarily because the region is everyone, jurisdictions, agencies, GPP, you are aware of that for sure. Everyone is looking at equity for sure, safety, again, that's another thing everyone is looking at. When we call sustainability, that's the third core value we look at. That's looked in different ways. Primarily, in many places, it's looked at as emission reduction. So these are all areas that many people are trying to look at and see how we can bring that into funding decisions, planning decisions, and funding decisions. So that's where the committee members were interested to know how NVTA is doing. So in this, if you can do one more slide, actually. Now, go back to the previous one. Thank you. So in the past, we presented this chart to you, where we presented all the quantitative results, which are all the numbers you see on the right-hand side columns, and then a series of qualitative measures that are the color-coded ones, those columns in here. The last color-coded column is long-term benefit. That is, again, a quantitative measure, though we are showing it in 3 colors that, if you remember, that measure specifically looks at the ratio or the share of transportation benefits each of the jurisdictions received from NVTA's funding compared to the share of revenues you all brought, each of the jurisdictions brought to the table. So that's one of the legally required measure we have to look at. We looked at it in different ways and concluded that we can come up with 3 parts. One where the share is approximately equal. The other one is you got more benefits than the revenue you brought. Or the opposite side is you receive less benefits than the share of revenue you brought to the table. So we color-coded that. If you got less benefits, we have you in green because that means you haven't received enough funding to meet or enough benefits to meet. So you should probably get more funding for more projects. If everything else is equal, then we can look at that as a consideration. Yellow means approximately equal. Brown means your share was less than the share of benefits was less than the revenue received. The 3 columns to the left of that, that's where we are focusing today. That's the alignment with core values, equity, safety, and sustainability. As you can see, they have yellow colors or green colors, which means they are highly aligned with the core values or medium level.
Yeah.
Yes, please.
The color coding again, I'm sorry. So for the long-term benefit, so the brown, like Prince William is in brown.
Yeah,
That means they've contributed more in revenue versus the benefits that they've received, or vice versa?
Vice versa.
Okay, so they've received more benefits relative to the revenue.
Correct.
Okay, and green is the opposite.
Opposite.
White, okay. Got it. Thank you.
Okay, anyone else have a question at this point?
So next slide, please. So at this point, we want to keep it at a higher level. This is the first time we are also looking at core values and trying to evaluate the projects to see how well they are aligning with those core values. So we wanted to make sure that we come up with a methodology which may not be perfect, and we wanted to test it out and see how it works and make sure that we improve it and implement it in the next round. This round, it was optional, and we are not kind of making that as a primary or any of the criteria or decision making, but we want to understand how they work, how this methodology works. This slide shows the 10 performance measures that we used in transactional long-range plan, as well as in 6-year program analysis, where we look at transaction rating, the weighted combined score of all these 10 performance measures. So this is already taken care of in the analysis that we shared with you. But the key here is, as you can see, there are several of these measures overlap with several of the core values. So we are already considering core values in these measures. So that's a high level. So it's not like we are not looking at the core values. We have three core values, but we are not looking at them. We are already incorporating them into this quantitative analysis. Next slide, please. To give you some idea what this all means, equity, these are the definitions already adopted by the authority and shared with the applicants. Okay, so I will not go read to. Arun, can you move that video a little bit to the side?
You just minimize it.
Yeah, that's another way to do it. Thank you. So I will not read through the entire thing, but I have underlined, this is not underlined by NVTA or anything, but I underlined some areas to focus. So we want to ensure fairness. We want to make sure that we give a specific, we specifically address or ensure fairness for the underserved population as a series of people that or groups that I have identified there. Low income, minority, elderly, children, women, people with limited English proficiency, and so on. And these projects, we hope that facilitate social and economic opportunities for these groups. And we all know that in the past, there were several injustices happened to these communities through, especially in transportation, through transportation projects. So we want to make sure that these projects actively avoids any further injuries to these groups. So that's the definition. And then some of the examples we provide here shows what project components could actually will be well aligned with that definition of equity. Our MPO for the region, TPB, has developed this concept called equity emphasis areas. They look at a few different parameters to define each of the census tracts to see if that is an equity emphasis area, basically. That is just look at the income, and I think they look at two things, income and minority population. These are the two criteria they weave in, and then they compare it across all the different, I think they might be doing it at TAC, the transit analysis, traffic analysis zone, which is a model-based geography. And if that zone falls under that particular threshold, then that area is called an equity emphasis areas, where you want to make sure those population, if you compare it with the average in the region, they are below that average. So you want to make sure that those areas are especially considered. So when we did the transaction, our long range plan update, which was adopted in December 2022, we expanded that specifically to Northern Virginia to make sure that when you look at the entire region's average, it may not be exactly looking at Northern Virginia only, it's looking at Maryland and DC too. So we wanted to make sure we look at specifically at Northern Virginia. When we did that, we expanded the equity emphasis area that TPD defined to a little bit more locations. So we were saying that if the project is providing benefit to those equity emphasis areas, then that project is contributing to equity. Other features, separated and protected bike facilities, if these are given, then that is good for equitable transportation, especially if they are provided for people who are traveling from those equity emphasis areas that are serving those populations. The emission reduction could be considered under sustainability too, but by doing, say, zero emission buses or low emission buses, especially those for those population, that emission is going down for them, that is contributing to equity. ADA access is prioritized for a project that gives that special consideration for people with disabilities. So those, especially connecting the different destinations. So those are all different examples that you can think of to build into your projects that will support its alignment with equity. Next step is safety, which had been discussed a lot everywhere. We at authority level also a lot of discussion happened on safety. We want to minimize fatality and severe injuries. We want to increase safe, healthy, and equitable mobility for all. Not only actual safety, but also perceptions of safety. We want to make sure that that is settled. That's something that we keep hearing in surveys that we do. People are not only thinking about actual incidents, but also thinking about safety or perception of safety in buses or in bus stops when they are waiting for bus in the evenings and things like that. So we want to make sure that the project addresses those issues. Some of the examples, again, separated and protected bike facility I mentioned earlier, which would again be a safety feature. Traffic calming measures on road projects, pedestrian scale lighting and wayfinding that improves, that again addresses some of that perception of safety topic. Separated bus lines or bike pedestrian safety infrastructure, a series of techniques or tools that have been used is mentioned here. So if you are providing those tools, using those tools in your project, then inherently that is going to increase the safety of all users, not just driver or a vehicle user. Intelligent transportation systems or ITS, transit signal priority or TSP, these are all additional technologies that are used that can help improve travel flow, better flow of buses. All these can reduce crashes and emissions. So these are all different features in the project that can make it aligned with safety. Next slide, please. Sustainability. When we say about that sustainability, generally people talk about reducing all kinds of emissions, including GHG, greenhouse gas emissions. We want to expand a little bit to make sure there are three pillars: economic sustainability, environmental sustainability, and social sustainability or social impacts. Environmental sustainability is what we discussed or what we usually hear, where zero emission buses can reduce emission. Resiliency and system redundancy are good for projects. Solar charging or shared mobility devices, those are all, or other features noted there, permeable surfaces, stormwater management techniques. These are all environmental that can increase environmental sustainability. And economic sustainability is when an area becomes more attractive for, say, businesses. One of the primary thing is congestion. Then if you can relieve the congestion, then that area becomes more attractive, more economic activity can happen. Or you develop new routes that connect existing regional transit systems. So obviously we have multiple bus systems, bus agencies in Northern Virginia. Are they well connected? Are they then connected to the metro system, which takes you to the regional, give you the regional connectivity? So are they all connecting together? Or there is another term called regional activity center that TPB defined, looked at the region and came up with certain areas where a lot of activities happen. So Tyson's probably is one of the areas, and there are many of them. So we looked at that, we expanded that definition also to say not just what TPP defined, but there are other activity centers in the region, especially when you go towards the western part of the region. There are not many regional activity centers defined by TPP, but we know that there are several locations in those western jurisdictions that are, again, maybe under the threshold that TPP looked at, but still there are activity centers. So we wanted to make sure that those are all taken into consideration. And are we connecting those? If yes, then that is giving them more options for travel other than auto using their own auto. So that gives better ranking for sustainability. Social sustainability or social impact, that's something that is not really discussed in many of these evaluations, placemaking, which makes it more attractive for people to use that space. So you have community art or wayfinding, the human scale lighting that gives that area an attraction and people can then use it, especially for, say, sidewalks and people who are walking by. Routes and alignment that are selected to prioritize connecting socially significant cities, not just economic activity, but other social activities, government center or community centers. How do we connect them with the rest of the transportation network? So those are the three different pillars: economic, environmental, and social, that we want to make sure these projects are looking at. Slide. With that in mind, we provided those definitions and examples as guidelines for applicants when the call for project was going out. And first time, this is the first time we are doing it. So we were still figuring out, okay, that's all great. How do we want to evaluate it? We were still developing that evaluation methodology, but we wanted the jurisdictions to think about these different concepts and tell us how their projects align with these concepts. So it was not mandatory, but strongly encouraged to provide a core value statement for each of the projects. How does this project align with equity, safety, and sustainability? We wanted them to highlight any relevant actions or plans in these the projects so that I will give you the examples. We wanted to make sure that they identify those and tell us. We wanted to make sure that this doesn't become too burdensome for the jurisdiction staff, so we kept it to maximum 3 pages, 1 page at the most for each core value. Give us some data, give us some maps or whatever you want to provide us, and explain how the project is aligned with that. So that's the guidance we gave them. Next slide, please. As I said, we gave them at the beginning of the call for projects, and we asked them to start putting together something. And at the same time, we were still figuring out how do we want to look at this and evaluate, come up with the score. So we went through a lot of research to see what other agencies, regional agencies are doing, and what we can do within the available resources we have, and came up with what you see in the couple of slides here. We wanted to review the application, and if the applicants submitted a core value statement, I say if because we didn't make it mandatory this time, this is all SC time is wrong. So if somebody submitted a core value statement, then we review that too, to understand the project, understand the alignment. Then we wanted to answer a series of questions. What we call the SMART, or specific, measurable, actionable, realistic, and time-bound submission or project. So is the project SMART? Are there specific examples, specific details given? Can we measure it? Are these ideas they are providing, are they actionable? Realistic, the time bound, can finish it within the project implementation timeframe. So we looked at that, each of that, and came up with 1 point. If it is specific, it gets 1 point. If it addresses all 5 of them, they get 5 points. Then next thing we looked at is a submission consistent with NVTA's definitions that I already shared earlier. It could be least consistent than 1 point. If it is really very good consistency there, then you get a maximum of 5 points. Test the portion of the submission about this one core value synergies or detract from the portion of the submission that's relevant to another core. So we have 3 core values. In some cases, doing something is good for one core value, but it may be not so good for another one. So that's a kind of, or are there synergies? That's a question we asked. Again, if it is really, if there is good synergy, then we give them 5 points. Next slide. Then we have some questions that specifically looking at each core value. For equity, does the submission address equity in a meaningful way? Many times, yeah, this project is great for equity. That's how it says. But how is it? Is it really, are you really doing something, or you are just stating it for the sake of addressing, yeah, we are doing something with equity? You wanted to look at the project, you look at the project definition, scope, and see if that is the case. Is that the intention to be equitable, thoroughly integrated throughout the project? So when you do the design, the design features addressing equity. Are you addressing all users, not just one mode or one type of users? You probably will have public engagement throughout the process of a project development, project implementation. Are you looking at that and making sure you reach out to those equity population? For example, are you using multiple languages? If that area may have more different people speaking different languages. So those are the kind of examples we get there. Then for safety specific, is a submission taking a comprehensive view of safety, which again means it should be looking at all types of users, all modes, not just one or the other. Are you looking at quantitative and qualitative data to see what kind of safety issues are there, how this project will reduce that safety issues there? Are you addressing the perception of safety? Earlier I mentioned during the definition, I mentioned about how people have that as a concern for many. So how does this project address those activities? Is safety the primary reason? So if it is not necessary that all projects are primarily they're doing it because of safety concern, but if they are, they should get a point because there are several existing safety hotspots in the region, whether it is vehicle crashes or vehicle to pedestrian and bike crashes, whichever it is. So if the project is in one of those locations, then they are trying to address something there. That's what we are looking at with that question. Sustainability specific questions. Does the application of this core value consider the greater regional context? It's not just this project. We have to look at what is the context of the region in which this project is happening. Is a project connecting to the regional network? Is it multimodal or just one mode? Are you connecting multiple systems and multiple jurisdictions, or just within that neighborhood? That sort of regional connectivity or the greater context within the region. How does a submission compare to established best practices of sustainability? For example, LEED certification, or you are adding electric buses, electric vehicles, charging stations, or e-bikes. These are all helpful in sustainability. Is the project helping reducing greenhouse gas emissions? Are you doing signal optimization, which can make the traffic smooth, have a smoother flow, and thus reducing the emissions? Are you adding shared use path or expanding transit? Those are kind of examples that you can think that will help. Those are all practices. Many people are already using that, so there's nothing new. But are you incorporating those different aspects into your project? Next slide. So if you looked at those scores, you can add up for each core value, you can get up to 25 points. But several of these you can see, we are reading through the application, reading through core value statements you are providing, and then scoring that if it is really aligned or not. There is a lot of subjectivity involved here. So we are not pretending that this number 25 scores mean that it's a very model-based output or a data-intensive analysis. It's not. There's a lot of subjectivity in it. So we had 3 different reviewers, all NVTA staff, 3 different people reviewing the applications independently, scoring them. Then we looked at those scores and averaged it. So that is for the same as I mentioned the subjectivity. I may be scoring a project high for one core value. Another person might think that it's not that great at the level of alignment, so they might give a lower score. And we wanted to make sure that extremes are removed, so we can get a reasonable score for each project. We had given or encouraged the applicants to provide core value statements. Some did, some didn't. So we wanted to give those who submitted those core value statements an additional point for their efforts to put that. So we did that. Once we had the scores, we categorized them as high, medium, low. So lower 1/3 is low, middle 1/3 will be medium, top 1/3 will be high. That's how we color-coded them. Next slide, please. That is specifically for the 24 candidate projects, how those 3 categories of scores fall. You can see that none of them have the red or the brown color there. That's partly because they're all doing something for the project, so for these core values. None of them are not doing anything. So they are all getting some good, reasonably good score. And then obviously some projects are really doing better, and the core value statements they provided or the application itself, they have described them well too, how what specific details, what specific activities they are doing in the project that will get them those high scores. If you have any questions at this point, I'll take that.
Yeah, Supervisor.
Well, thank you. It's obviously a lot of thoughtful work has gone into the process, and relatively new to NVTA, so maybe missing some historical context. But just looking at the chart that says evaluation summary. So the transaction project ratings are statutory, so they're based on the underlying statute, and they do not include this core value rating.
Transaction showed the transaction rating chart where the 10 performance measures are there.
They happen to be, so the core values are inherent in
many of those
measures. Many of them,
yes.
but like this 1 through 25 is in part.
Yeah,
got it.
Yeah.
Okay. And so at what point did NVTA decide to kind of layer on the core value analysis on top of the transaction ratings?
The transaction rating, those measures were already there.
Understood, right.
And when during the transaction update, authority decided that we need to look at these core values. So they came up with the core value data, but these 3 areas we need to give special attention. So when we defined those core values and came up with those areas, we looked at those 10 performance measures which are already there to see if they're already addressing these or not. That's how we show that, yeah, some of them are already addressing these concepts in one other way. That's the overlap we showed. That
You understood. So, and I'm just trying to understand why we as an authority felt, given that core values are already by our own determination part of the transaction elements, inherent in some of the transaction scoring elements, including equity emphasis areas. What made us decide to say we're going to create an additional process to analyze the core values specifically after the transaction ratings?
Sure. Keith can add to it, but if you look at the definition and I have to underline and explain some of the things, not all of them are captured in those measures. Some parts of it are captured, but not necessarily all the different aspects that we discussed in the definition. They are not, all of them are not captured in the measure.
Yeah.
That's the reason why, so that's only part of the story. We want to see the full story.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions? Anyone? Okay, thank you.
Thank you. With that, I can just walk through a couple of examples here, how we looked at them, what we saw in the applications that led to some of these scores. Next slide, please. VRE backlit road station improvement. These are all just examples. It doesn't, it's as I said, we have all these quantitative analysis that show the results of various quantitative measures and other things, but it is just one of those multitude of valuation measures that we look at. VRE backlit road station improvements project is extending VRE platform at that station where it can only accommodate 5 to 6 cars at this point. By extending the platform, all 8 cars, people can get in and out at the same time. That's a project. So we looked at the application, we looked at the core value statement and went through those questions that I explained earlier, one by one, and see how they score. And you see that all 3 core values, they are performing reasonably high. So they got the high score in all 3 core values. Next one. North Fax network improvements in the city of Fairfax. It's completing a road grid connection. There are intersection improvements happening. There are some bike path improvements, bike path facilities in that area. When we looked at that, they are doing something for all these, so they are getting some scores, but it's not to the level that we saw for VRE, how well they are addressing those topics or how the data is showing what kind of impacts they are having. It's not that high level, but they are still doing some improvements that will improve these 3 values in positive. Next one, please. Route 15 at Braddock Road roundabout. This is a project in Loudoun County. Currently, a 3-let intersection, if I remember correctly, that will be made into a 4-let roundabout with bike path, additional bike pedestrian in that channel area of intersection. We looked at it. It definitely is improving a lot in safety, but not necessarily as much in the other 2 areas. So that's reflected in the safety getting a high score and the other 2 getting medium scores. This is just examples to show how they, by doing certain things, it affects certain core values, not necessarily all of them, but in some cases, the projects are really impacting all the core values if they're getting high scores with them. One more slide, I think that's all for the discussion about the core value I have. What we wanted to hear from you is, what do you think about this? Is there, in your knowledge, in your experience, from your jurisdictions or other agencies, have you seen areas where we can improve, we can learn from them, or do you have any areas that you want us to work additionally on, modify this methodology? Any suggestions from you if you have?
I have one question. From talking to residents, we're looking through some of the projects. I got feedback saying, I really like this project if it had these additional features, or if they had changed this to make it a little bit more pedestrian friendly. I would be supportive of it. So what room is there to actually adjust projects before we approve them?
Do you want to answer that question?
Sorry, Keith Jasper, a principal at NVTA. I think, and this also picks up from Supervisor Shaw's question as well. I think by pulling out the core values explicitly in the way we're doing here and demonstrating what we consider to be a project that's highly aligned with each core value, that even though we're not, applying this in our project recommendation process this time because it's so new. It is like a test run through for us and for you and your staff. We really hope that in time, in future cycles, that understanding how we see project applications aligning with our core values will lead to projects that do kind of strive for the green. Gold is the wrong color in this case, but the top level of alignment, so that not only do we find projects that are scoring well on the mandatory scales, the statutory scales that we have to apply, that the projects also are aligned with our core values on equity, safety, and sustainability. So it's a bit of a feedback loop. Because we do this every 2 years, it's a slow feedback loop. But we wanted to start. The authority members wanted us to do this, and it's going to be an iterative process. Or it's too hard to say at this stage exactly how it's going to play out. But that's kind of what we go.
For this funding round, is it possible to approve projects with conditions, or projects have to be approved as is?
I don't see why we cannot make recommendations that are conditional on something happening. I don't know that we got much of a history of doing that, but I don't know of any reason why we cannot do that.
Great, thank you.
Okay, anyone else? Yes.
I mean, just my feedback and thoughts for the future to consider. I'm cautious about when we're kind of double and sometimes triple counting certain elements. Now that's subjective, maybe hard to determine, and we want to emphasize our values, but I think that's an important question. I've gone through that with VDOT, actually on the Braddock Road project that's in here in terms of their scoring, and it can feel very unfair to people when there's an element that seemingly is counted 2, 3, or 4 times, or is incorporated into multiple elements of scoring. And then the other, kind of thought I have, and just looking at the Route 15 at Braddock Road roundabout, I'm not sure which slide that is. I guess my concern would be, are we scoring the project? Are we scoring how well jurisdictional staff responded and drafted the statements, right? So for example, when it says synergies are not explained, how will the reduced speeds help equity? Does that mean that the reduced speeds in the project don't help equity? Or that it just wasn't explained? It sounds like it just wasn't explained in the statement. So I guess that would be a question: is there a back and forth and dialogue with the jurisdictional staff to say, hey, you all didn't explain how the reduced speeds help equity? Is that because they don't and you can't explain it, or you just were busy in trying to wrap up this statement and get it to us for the deadline? So that back and forth would be important. And related to that, I always have concerns about when we're layering on additional processes. What does that mean in terms of staff time? And does that, and quite frankly, it probably works to the advantage of larger jurisdictions who have the staff and the bandwidth to, have multiple layers of review of everything that we submit and devote one staff person full time to submitting these applications. And I worry about creating too much process that rewards those who invest time into the process rather than necessarily the projects. And I like the page limit that you had, because I think that that does establish a standard that maybe everybody can comfortably meet. But those are the concerns that I would have.
Can I just respond to the last of those? At the end of each kind of major update cycle, either our 6-year program or transaction, we do reach out to the jurisdiction agency staff for feedback. We tweak each cycle, each update cycle, to try and learn the lessons from the previous.
Yeah.
And certainly, you know, it's a fair point. Between our first update to transaction since HB 2313 passed in 2013, you know, we've done 2 updates to our long-range plan transaction, and between the first and the second of those, you know, there was a major piece of feedback that came, you know, from a broad range of folks, staff saying, you know, we kind of trust you guys to do your job. We'd like to have fewer meetings.
Me too.
And so, you know, if we had a subcommittee in the first of those 2 updates, which was meeting on a monthly basis, and in some months, during intense periods, it was meeting 2 or I think it was even one much where it met 3 times in a month. So I mean that was kind of fresh in the mind for a lot of folks, and we took that on board, and we kind of moved actually to more of a quarterly approach for meetings, but even then only at key points in the process where there was some significant guidance needed. So I'd say that just to give an example that we are sensitive to that. To date, we've not had any feedback from any jurisdiction staff to say it's too much. But if as part of our review process we did get that feedback, absolutely take it on board. To the double counting or triple counting thing, it's a fair point, and other committees have raised the same point. I think, you know, we need to look at that in the after action review, do sometime over the summer or in the fall, and you know, not only look at the core value stuff and the way we approach that, but also look at the transaction ratings approach, which is an inherently model-based approach, and see whether, you know, one or both of those needs to be changed. But really, the intention here with pulling out the core values is, you know, they kind of get buried in the transaction ratings approach with other measures that are not, well, core values aren't measures in the first place, to be honest with you. But the measures related to the goals of what we're trying to accomplish. The core values are how we try to accomplish them. So they're not really scored as such in the transaction ratings, but unless they are explicitly a safety measure, in which case they will get scored. But none of that helps us really understand the alignment of the project with the core values, because it's buried in a modeling numerical process. And so doing this, at least, even if in this cycle we won't be double counting, because we're not really placing any emphasis at all on the core values in making our recommendations, but we might in the next cycle, but it might not exist in quite this form in the next cycle.
Yeah. And it is the idea that the core values would be kind of like a pass fail, or that they would be numerically then applied to the transaction ratings
In the next update cycle,
Yeah,
I don't know.
to be determined.
To be determined, exactly.
Yes.
If we have thoughts on the metrics after this meeting, can we send in comments via email? Who would we send them to you?
I don't, you know, his, you know, so you can
Yes,
send
great.
it.
Okay. Thank you.
Yes.
I think you probably covered this before I got here, so thank you for your patience, if you're repeating yourself, but going back to the second slide, the resiliency piece, could you tell me why the transportation system redundancy is scored less than the others?
Oh, yeah, that's a performance measure.
On the transaction
Performance
rating.
measures. So these as part of transaction, long range plan update, we went through a process. In the previous version, we had 15 measures. There was too much, nothing was getting any importance. So we had a discussion at the jurisdiction staff and all the consultants, everyone together, and came up with these 10 measures. And then we went through a process of giving them weights at different committees. This committee also looked at that and decided, it did kind of a polling. Everyone said that I think this should be given 10%, that or 20%. And each committee came up with that weights, and then it went to the authority, and the authority looked at all that and finally decided this should be the rates. So you can think of it like when you kind of average it out, they're all more or less getting 10 points, except two of them which are different. That measure D1, quality of access to transit and the walkable network, that got by extra points of 15 points, that people thought that needs to be something we want to aspire for. So if the projects that we do in that area, it should get more weight. Whereas the last one that you pointed out, the transportation system redundancy, that measure is there partly from the state law that require us to look at whenever we make funding decisions, project evaluations, look at certain things. And one of them was what we call the homeland security kind of situation where you need people to evacuate or get out from their places and go back home or other places. So there is a huge surge in demand on our transportation network at the same time, not the regular demand, but another extra surge in demand. So that is a special case. So other team member and all the committees thought that, well, that's a special case, not compared to rest of the measures that we are looking at on a day-to-day basis. So that probably is not as important as the rest of the measures. So in general, that was a comment we saw when people started putting less weight on that particular measure. Yeah.
No, just a note at the bottom with the asterisk, HB 599, that's actually from 2012. The asterisk actually applied under objective. So for that particular one, G1, which relates to objective G, was one of those things which actually specifically is called out in Virginia Code. So we have to include it, but Virginia Code doesn't tell us the extent to which we have to include it. We just have to include it. So I guess in theory that could be set to 0. It's included, but it's not actually having any influence on the coverage. Maybe not 0, perhaps 1. But that was like the consolidated view of 2 statutory committees, of which this is one standing committee, and then on to NVTA for actual action. This was adopted in 2020. 2020 or 2021. Actually, I think it's 2021. The vision was adopted in 2020 and this was adopted in 2020.
It's just at the top of mind right now a little bit, just in consideration of the sort of impact of the Francis Scott Key Bridge collapse and some of that. You know, what happens if an overpass on 66, you know, a car catches on fire and it collapses the bridge or something like that. Like, and I do think that there is something to weighing that, the redundancy and being able, because that does hit a multimodal impact. So I don't know.
So that is considered.
Yeah.
It doesn't have as much the same weight as some of the others, but it is definitely considered. That is built into the scoring. So it is already considered.
Yeah. And this will be reviewed and probably updated when we next do our long range plan update, which should be off next year. The actual adoption date will be some point towards the end of 2027. So we could work back 2 or 3 years from that, when we start. And so this will be reviewed and potentially updated. But we've already flagged for the next update to transaction. We will be raising our focus on transportation system resiliency, because we think that is a growing thing that NVTA needs to take into account when it's making project funding decisions. So it will flow down eventually from transaction, which is fiscally unconstrained, to a particular program where the money is actually. We want to make sure that we don't invest in projects where there's some sense of heightened obsolescence in the future, and risk wasting the money.
Okay, I have a question back on, like the example for the Braddock Road roundabout. It's obvious why I think safety, got the highest score there. I love our roundabout in Vienna, and, we're thinking about putting another one in. And the intersection that we're gonna put this other one, unfortunately, there was we had planned to put it in, and then, just recently, there was a really serious accident. Person I think is still in the hospital. But how would equity be scored higher? Could a roundabout be scored higher than equity, or is it just that this particular application did not explain the equity? That's the part I understand, because wouldn't equity, I mean, if it's safety, wouldn't it be safety for all people, or am I not looking at that right?
Sure, definitely it could score high. Anything could score higher than what simply if you didn't get high score in this case. But some of the key things that we mentioned earlier are the connecting and serving equity, population equities, and those areas are the combination of different features. Are they supporting it, or are they kind of distracting? In some cases, we know there is a signal. If it is a signalized intersection, you can have separate bike and pedestrian lanes for the signal where vehicles are stopped and people can walk across. In most of the roundabouts, that's not the case. The vehicles are flowing smoothly. They're just slowing down, yielding to the people on the circle already, and they're moving. So many times, one area is still safe because the vehicles are going slow, but still there may not be enough gap for certain type of people to cross that intersection when there is a roundabout. So that could be considered as a negative aspect.
Right. And but so a roundabout, I mean, maybe it would be improved if it was better for the pedestrians. Somehow it was improved for the pedestrian versus the cars. You're kind of saying, like, we're going to put lights at our crossings. It's very dark at night, and I drive through this all the time. But anyway, we're going to have lights, so that would be something that maybe would improve the equity.
Yeah, I mean, when you look at some of the safety examples,
right.
Separated and protected bike facilities or trail or shared use path is created.
Yeah.
Traffic calming measures and roundabouts, when designed appropriately, are inherently traffic calming,
Yes.
but you can design them for very high speeds as well. So that's something you've got to be mindful of with roundabouts. If you want to slow traffic down, then design them to slow traffic down, and in so doing, that inherently makes improved safety. And then lighting, as you say, is an important feature in all transportation safety. So that would definitely, if that's incorporated into the design, that definitely helps.
Okay. Anyone else? Yes, that's Supervisor Franklin.
More so comments. I think perhaps we should think about equity with regards to, and I'll just call it infrastructure, a little bit differently than how we're discussing it. The way I look at equity, to me, it's not about the actual transportation infrastructure. It's more so about accessibility and guaranteeing that communities that need improved safety measures, transportation wise, have the resources and access to that or have an avenue towards it through, these infrastructure projects. Similarly to other types of communities. So for instance, guaranteeing that the infrastructure improvements on the eastern end of Prince William County are similar or on a path to becoming similar to the infrastructure improvements on the western end of the county. That's how I look at equity rather than, perhaps if we go back to the Braddock example, rather than looking at the specific roundabout versus, because I think some of the questions that I'm hearing is kind of to the point of, well, it didn't quite explain how the roundabout produces or provides equity, but we know that the roundabout is in fact important. And so I think that's part of the challenge. We're assigning equity to the actual infrastructure instead of to the idea of accessibility. And so I'm not sure how you refine that, but I think that, it becomes very complicated when you look at each, does this stop sign provide equity? I think that becomes very complicated. Whereas the question should be, are there enough stop signs in this community? Because we know that there are an abundance of stop signs in other similarly situated communities that happen to be either wealthier or newer or whatever.
But definitely that's a great idea, and we need to look into those sort of aspects, what we can incorporate in. We can think of apply not for us, but in other regions where I worked, I keep hearing about how the restriction is deciding on pavement, repavement of streets, for example, or repavement.
That's very good.
Repair work of sidewalks. It happens in certain areas of the community, but
Yep.
not in other communities.
That's a great example. That's absolutely right.
So now we can think of straight over that.
Okay, I think we're good with that.
Right? Thank you. And the last slide. Yes. Yep, that's one. So this is a schedule of the 6-year program. The grade areas are already done. In fact, that we just completed the public comment period earlier this week or last Sunday. We are still going through the comments to see how many comments and what kind of comments which projects are getting to, what kind of comments for each project are supporting or opposing. We're going through that analysis now. We already hosted the public hearing, right? Yeah, as I said, we are going through the public comment and we will have that report ready sometime next week. The first opportunity then is to present it to the authority at their June meeting. Subsequently, you all will be meeting on June 20th. That time, by then, we will have two things to present you. One, that public comment summary. And based on all these evaluation scores that we presented, quantitative, qualitative measures, public comments, everything together, staff will be developing funding recommendations in the next 3 to 4 weeks. This is before your next meeting. So June 20th meeting, we will be presenting those staff recommendations to you all. Same day, the other statutory committee TAC will also be meeting, present the same staff recommendations to them too. You can discuss at that point about the merits, demerits, and you can either endorse the staff recommendation as is, or you can discuss, and if you want to modify it, do that, and that whatever you recommend, that will go to the planning and programming committee on June 25th. They will see the staff recommendation, technical advisory committee recommendation, and this committee's recommendation. Putting them together, they will prepare one recommendation that will go to the authority at their July meeting for adoption. So next meeting is on June 20th, where we need all of you here to discuss those recommendations and come up with our own proposal.
So we would vote on something at the June 20.
June 20.
Are we meeting in July?
We don't.
Do you want to?
No. Well, I think I may be, if we meet in July, I think someone else may.
As we currently see things, assuming that you're able to make your endorsement in June and NVTA makes its adoption decision in July, there would not be anything else we have right now to share with you that would justify a July meeting.
I think everybody's okay with that. All right, good. Yeah, that's what I was thinking. Okay.
Chair Robert, we now have a quorum, so we can
Okay,
get back to
excellent.
our meeting minutes approval.
All right, thank you. The summary notes of March 27th, 2024, are there any changes to those minutes that anybody would like to make? Okay, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, those meeting minutes are passed. All right, and we don't have Ms. Hoffman. We have an NVTA update.
We have.
Oh, we're not there yet. We're on preliminary deployment plan for regional BRT system.
I can cover 4 and 5 this evening. Ms. Backman has got a meeting conflict this evening. For the preliminary deployment plan for our regional bus rapid transit system, some updates. Just first off, a quick refresher. We initiated this preliminary deployment plan in order to protect the investments that NVTA has already made in BRT in Northern Virginia, which is now running close to $500 million. We also want to make sure that any future investments in BRT or things related to BRT are consistent with the investments that have been made, and then when lines are added incrementally over the years ahead, that the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. I'm sure the individual lines will be very impactful. We think there will be synergies that go above and beyond that. And so taking a systems approach to this is, we sum it up by saying, and I've said this before, think big, start small, build momentum. And that's why we're doing it. Where we currently are is still in phase 1, which is the initial engagement phase. So we've completed a perception survey, we've completed focus groups. We are now, actual fact, this week we've started an online survey to kind of refine our understanding of how Northern Virginians feel about the concept of BRT and the sorts of things they'd like us to take into account as we approach the development of that. I think Arun sent you an email a couple of days ago with a link to the survey, and if you feel so inclined to amplify our messaging, we'll be more than happy to provide you with all the tools that you need or your staff need to do that. Just let Arun know, and we can forward any information to you on that. The online survey is being kind of complemented and supplemented through a series of pop-up events, which actually started yesterday. The first one was at the King Street Metro Station in Alexandria. We've got a number of these spread across the region while the online survey is open. And we're particularly targeting areas with, I guess equity emphasis areas, areas where there could be a high concentration of people who do not traditionally engage with us for reasons of language or whatever. So that's kind of ongoing in parallel with the survey. And then we're gearing up towards moving into phase 2 of the work, which is more where the analytics is going to be done. The analytics is going to be very broad-based. But as we kind of pivot from phase 1 to phase 2, we're looking to hold a 2-part work session with authority members at their June and July meetings to kind of share information and seek feedback. Particularly in the July meeting, we want some feedback so that we can take that on board as we go into the analytical phase. But we also want to share the findings from both the focus groups and the online survey, which will be almost over by the time we meet in June. So that's something we want to all have. The phase 2 analysis will look at things like ridership, congestion reduction, operational characteristics, governance, funding, and on and on. There'll be a lot of things that we're looking at. And then that will wrap up in about spring of next year when in phase 3, we'll move back into public engagement, perhaps a little bit more formal. There'll be a lot more detail to share at that point. There'll be another work session with the authority, and we're looking to get the preliminary deployment plans approved around this time next year, maybe June, July next year. And then depending on what's in it, we'll see where we go. I will say that there are a number of BRT related applications in the 6-year program currently evaluating. So some of those may be recommended for funding as well. I think that's all I have on the preliminary deployment plan. Happy to take any questions. If none, I can go on to the update.
Please continue.
Okay, so today we're very excited to join with members of the Fairfax County Board of Supervisors, BDOT, and others to cut a ribbon on the Route 7 widening project. And this is the part of Route 7 between Classons and Reston. For disclosure, it's been my commute route for almost 30 years, and I'm really pleased. And I hope others are as well. So that was a big event for us today. I think Adam Tuss was there, so there may be some coverage on TV. The June 13th authority meeting has a heavy agenda, not least because of that part 1 of that work session I just mentioned, but also the 6-year program public comments will be presented. There'll be some action items related to procurement to refresh our website, which haven't really been professionally updated in quite a number of years now, and so that will help us with ongoing communications efforts. There'll also be approval of what we call PAYGO, which is actually the other piece of the 6-year program that we need in order to make recommendations, which is how much money do we have. The Finance Committee met last week, and they have recommended a number just shy of 700 million. Hopefully the authority will approve that amount of money, and then that will help us with the recommendations. I anticipate for that meeting that's coming up that Sri mentioned on June 20th, that we will be sending you our recommendations on the evening of June 13th, which is when the authority meets. So when the authority has met and we've got the number confirmed, we'll send you our recommendations. We'll have already calculated them based on what the Finance Committee told us, but until NVTA approves the number, we don't want to waste your time if that number might change. So you don't have to read the recommendations on the evening of June 13th, but thereafter, hopefully you take a chance to look at that. We'll also be looking at endorsing some grant applications. We'll be doing some standard project agreements, and Haroon will be providing our quarterly travel trends update as well at that meeting. So pretty heavy agenda. And I would just circle back just quickly, if I may, to the Route 7 widening. Although that was a project we actually started construction 5 years ago, June, I think, of 2019. At that time, we were not looking at core values. I don't think the words had ever even been uttered at NVTA at that point, but we nonetheless wanted to go back and apply the methodology that Sri outlined this evening to that project to see how it would scored, as it were, or performed, or how well aligned it was with our core values, how we applied that approach at that time. And as it turns out, it actually performed really well. I think it got a high on 2 of the core values and a medium on the other one, the middle one on the other. But it is a project that is very well aligned with those core values. So we're very pleased about that.
It's great. Is that
That's it.
anything more? Okay, excellent. And so, in NVTA date, we're not gonna do that.
That was it.
Okay.
That is it.
And just want to call everybody's attention that June 20th is a Thursday, we're meeting, on a Thursday, not a Wednesday, in June. Does anyone else have any further comments or questions? Okay, I do want to encourage everybody to go to Viva Vienna this weekend. All the money goes back to PD, Rotary Club puts it on, it's a lot of fun for your families. And with that, I think we adjourn. Okay, thanks everybody.